This is the Saris MHS DUO rack system. And if the name Saris sounds new to you, don't feel bad. But don't let that make you think that they are in any way lacking. In fact, this MHS DUO system that I've been playing with over the last month or so kind of blows a lot of those bigger manufacturers out of the water. Now, before I go on, I should say that Saris did go ahead and give this rack to Wendy and I to review for free, and we will be keeping it. That said, no money changed hands, and as usual with any of our bike reviews or anything else like that, everything you're hearing from us is our own uncensored thoughts. So with that out of the way, let's get into things and talk about each part that comes in the system, the installation process, and of course, what our experience has been like so far. Up first is the MHS Hitch Base. And MHS, by the way, stands for Modular Hitch System. And they call it that because each one of these things that are on the base can be removed and interchanged between the different Saris products that are compatible with it. The base itself is available in a variety of lengths depending on how many racks you wish to mount, and I ended up going with the 2+1, meaning I can mount 2 bike trays to the base as well as 1 additional mount via the add-on adapter that I'll be talking about shortly. A 1+1 and 3+1 base are also available. The installation process here honestly couldn't be any easier. You simply just slide the base into your hitch receiver, tighten down the threaded bolt, and add the Saris lock to the opposite end, and you're good to go. As for the user experience, there's honestly nothing too fancy going on here. It does have a 4-position hinge that allows you to lower the rack to access your trunk with the rack loaded, as well as raise the rack when not in use. Lastly, the base does come with a lock core, and it's the same lock core that's on the locks for the trays. So that makes it super simple to just make sure everything's secure, and you only have to carry 1 key around with you. Next, let's talk trays. Since Wendy and I often review heavier e-bikes, we decided to go with the burlier but also more expensive Duo tray that you're looking at here. This design uses a dual arm system to clamp both wheels, similar to a one-up rack. Each tray is also rated to carry up to a 100-pound bike, which of course is way outside of our needs, and it also exceeds pretty much any other rack on the market. In addition to that heavy weight, you can fit tires that are up to 5 inches wide, which is again pretty much class leading. So that means if Wendy and I want to explore some fat biking this winter, the Saris rack will be able to come with us. Lastly, the rack is compatible with bikes from 20 to 29-inch wheels by raising or lowering this, which is important to me because, again, we ride full-size mountain bikes, dirt jumpers. I still carry around a BMX bike. But that actually is one of my biggest pet peeves with this rack system, is that moving this up and down is way more complicated than it needs to be. It's not a quick release. It's not just a little pull something out and slide it. This actually threads in and out, and it's pretty tricky to get that bolt to slide back through into the threaded slot on the other end. So if I had one issue with this rack, that would definitely be it. Remember earlier how I said MHS stands for Modular Hitch System? Well, that really comes down to how these trays attach to the base itself, which is with a hinged clasp that secures with a T-nut. Unsurprisingly, there were a few more steps involved in building and installing the tray than the base, but it was all still relatively simple. The first step was attaching the aforementioned clasp to the tray using the 4 included bolts, as well as assembling the T-nut assembly into the arm of the clasp. From there, you are ready to clamp the tray to the base. Simply line it up with one of the recessed sections on the base and torque the bolt down to their specifications. With the tray installed, there were just a few more accessories to add, including the sliding rear wheel strap, front wheel chock, and a lock core. I've been using these Duo racks for about a month now, and so far, I really don't have too much bad to say about them. Again, that 2-arm design does hold the bike on there pretty dang tight. There's no excessive wobble, and when you load 2 bikes on, as long as you have the kind of front wheel alternating, there's no touching between the bikes, so you don't need to worry about them getting scratched up on a bumpy road. I also like the one-handed release mechanism, which made even the awkward chore of removing a rear bike with a bike on the front tray easy enough. Another feature I really like is this integrated lock that slides real cleanly into the base, and when you pull out both sides, it's actually just barely long enough to go around 2 frames, meaning you only have to worry about 1 lock when carrying 2 bikes with you. All in all, I have been very impressed with the Saris MHS Duo rack. It functions well, and it probably is one of the most versatile trays on the market, with that 100-pound weight limit, 20 to 29-inch wheels, and then the ability to fit a 5-inch tire. Now, if you don't need all of that versatility, you might be more interested in the Uno rack. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that system in a second here, but that can fit up to a 60-pound bike and a 3-inch wide tire and the same 20 to 29-inch wheels. Speaking of the Uno tray, it's not currently installed right now, but I also have the Uno add-on. Like I mentioned earlier, this allows you to turn this 2-bike base into a 3-bike rack, but regardless of whether you get the Uno or the Duo add-on, it still has a weight limit of 35 pounds. And sadly, that makes it so probably about half the bikes that we own, those big alloy enduro bikes, are gonna be too heavy to go in that outer position. That said, I do still think it's helpful. Of course, if you're a roadie, you're not gonna run into that issue. And for us, for Wendy and I, the big reason we got it is the potential to put a kid's bike on there and still have both of our bikes as well as a kid's bike. As far as installation goes, the first step was to actually remove the caps that came on the end of the base and then add the new mounting plates that came with the tray in their place. Next, it was time to piece together the tray itself. Unlike the Duo rack that came pretty much fully assembled, you do have to add the retractable arm to the Uno. This is done by once again removing some housing and then bolting the arm in place. The last step on this tray was to install the truss assembly to the bottom. With the arm correctly oriented and the truss in place on the outside, it's time to add the tray to the base, which clamps on with 4 security bolts. Now, we actually haven't used the Uno tray yet, again, mostly because of the aforementioned weight limit. There's not too many times where we'd want to have 3 different bikes on here and one of them be less than 35 pounds. Most of the time when we are going to be carrying more bikes than just our own, it's because we're shuttling, and again, those are those bigger enduro bikes that oftentimes exceed that weight limit. Another thing that I've noticed is that when this rack stores in that upright position, it can't actually go to the full 90 degrees when set up like this, but Saris seems to have thought this through, and there's a 4th position that locks a tray in at about 60 degrees. It looks a bit wonky, but it does get the rack out of the way just as well. Now, there is one thing that's pretty important that I haven't touched on yet, and that is, of course, pricing. And the way that Saris sells this modular system means that you can actually buy each one of these pieces individually. But you can also buy this full set with the 2+1 base and the 2 Duo trays as a kit, which lists for $900. At face value, this is quite a bit more than its competitors. For example, the 1UP equipped lists for $805, the Yakima Stage 2 for $800, and the Thule T2 Pro XTR for $750. That said, the Saris rack does exceed all of those other racks when it comes to maximum weight and wheelbase. Not to mention the fact that it's modular, so you can change this out. You can put on a cargo basket they make for it. Saris says they're gonna be making more modular attachments, maybe a ski rack down the road. So you could, in theory, let this one base be all your rack needs. Now, if you don't have a 100-pound bike with 5-inch tires and you want to save a little bit of money, then you can get the Saris Uno setup, which actually costs just $700 and is therefore the cheapest out of all of those competing brands. So in terms of overall value, I have to say it's the same thing as when I'm talking about bikes. Value is very much dependent on your particular use case. So if you don't have a full-size e-bike or a fat bike, then yeah, maybe you don't need all the features that come with this and you'd be better off with another brand or of course Saris's Uno system. But if you do use those types of bikes or you just want the ability to be able to switch this out and use some of those other racks that I've talked about, then honestly, Saris can't really be touched. Let's wrap things up then with some quick pros and cons. And for me, the biggest pro, and again, the reason why I went with this system, is the compatibility with heavy e-bikes and fat tires. The second big pro for me is modularity. I could definitely see myself, using that cargo basket in the future for non-bike related trips. Though in all fairness, our family doesn't really take a lot of non-bike related trips, but you get the point. And then finally, the third pro that I would point out is just how secure the bike feels on this system. And in terms of cons, my biggest one, like I've already said, has to do with how you change the wheel size. It's a pretty complicated thing, and because Wendy and I both ride dirt jumpers, we ride mullet bikes, these are gonna have to go back and forth all the time, and quite frankly, it's a pain in the butt. So Saris, I hope that you go ahead and improve that design for your next generation. The next con that I have is the weight limit on that outer rack, the add-on rack, but I realize that's kind of specific to my use of riding heavier aluminum enduro bikes. So if you're a road biker or, XC rider, your bikes are all under 35 pounds, then you shouldn't have that issue. The last con obviously is the price. At $900, this system isn't cheap, but I do think it is a higher quality and again, definitely more versatile package than anything else on the market. If you're still on the fence or have any more questions about the Saris MHS system, then please go ahead and drop those in the comments and I'll try to answer them. And if not, I'll reach out to Saris and get you the answer that way. Thanks as always for tuning in, and hopefully we'll see you on the trails.